Welcome to Larking Gowen Insights, accountancy and business advice for all, a series that gives you bite-sized tips and guidance on tax, funding, legislation, reforms and much more. With case studies, business advisory and sector specials and even interviews, our team of experts are committed to helping you navigate the world of accounting and finance with a variety of presenters from across our specialisms. So, let's get on with today's show.
Hello everyone, welcome to this week's conversation where we're talking about further education finances. In particular on further education finances, we're talking about VAT. And so my name's Giles Kerkham and I'm joined by my excellent colleague, Gillian McGill.
Hello, Giles.
Why are we talking about colleges this week, Gilly?
Well, we've not long had the budget, Giles, and I think that hopes were quite high in the sector that there would be some assistance for further education, and that just did not come to pass. We did have a bit of a campaign from the Association of Colleges on finances for further education, particularly looking at VAT treatment that those colleges have, but to no avail as yet.
Yep, and we're certainly going to come back to talking about VAT and that campaign. First, I think let's introduce, what do we feel about finances for colleges? Are they well funded, Gilly?
No, they really aren't. They are very much the poor relation in the education sector. They have had decrease in their funding, and I think, Giles, you as somebody who works closely with colleges has some insight into that from a trustee role.
Yep, you're right, Gilly. I'm a college trustee. One thing I'd say about college funding is it's very complicated. You've got lots of different income streams. You've got 16 to 18 fund, adult skills funding, all sorts of different types of funding, much more complex than, say, an academy school where typically 80% is of funding is from one source. Certainly the funding since the period, let's start at say 2010, is very, very much reduced in real terms per pupil, and the comparison is even greater when you compare it to increases that have been put into schools, both primary and secondary. This, however, it's not just the amount of funding, it's the timing of announcements of funding. So, for instance, DfE announced late recently the 16 to 18 funding settlement. It's at 9%, 1.9% for the main funding, far below what salary increases are going to have to be. There's more in maths and English, but requirements on those and requirements on teaching hours really not properly thought through. And we know that some officials are just embarrassed by that. Secondly, capital funding settlement comes through very late, and that's annual. And with capital, you try and plan multi-year, and you just can't.
So that their hands are being tied then, aren't they? Particularly on the capital funding, as you say, because these are really big projects. They're strategic, and a college needs time over a number of years probably to think about them and to program them and to secure the funding and then actually execute them. So that's just unsatisfactory, really.
Right.
And as well as that drop in funding, I think what you're saying really is that the further education sector is being asked to do more.
Yes, you're right, Gilly. And colleges are terrifically important, particularly in the local context, because everything's about skills, development's about skills. We know that we're going to have to change our skills, retrain more and more frequently, and colleges are a key part of that. So it would seem to be short-termist to ignore that and to defund them effectively. Right, Gilly, let's just pause on the finances a bit. We'll move away we'll be slightly less gloomy, and we'll talk about something else that's happening in the colleges sector. As you know, there was a fairly recent announcement that FE colleges and similar institutions in England have been recategorised into the central government sector where they weren't before, which means that colleges are now subject to certain new requirements, which primarily relate to financial controls and government. It brings them into a regime in some ways similar to academy trusts, but given that where they come from, they're losing some freedoms. Yeah, so they're losing freedoms to borrow. They will need more permissions to borrow. Typically, colleges are used to funding themselves using loan finance, bank loans, and that becomes much more difficult. They will need government prior authorization to take out loans, but also as their existing loans come to term, they are needing authorization to refinance, which is difficult. So
if we're talking about the fact that the capital funding announcement you referred to earlier is coming out later and is only on an annual basis, that must make capital programs extremely difficult for the sector because they can't loan finance those anymore,
yeah,
or not easily.
and some major, to be fair, some major projects will get central funding, but it's the more routine maintenance improvement that becomes more difficult. And it's to the extent that there are sets of accounts that have come out that have going concern problems in the last year. There are some that are delayed because of waiting for government permissions. Auditors have got nervous about signing off accounts without having government permissions on certain things, which might include the refinancing.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's several sets of accounts that are late for that. Several sets because of other governmental funding audits that haven't reported, and there's the risk of clawbacks on those major pieces of funding. Again, it is complicated. The funding is complicated. The funding, including on areas such as apprenticeships, is high risk because you do the work. You then have a funding audit. You have a risk of very, very significant amounts of money being clawed back if you can't demonstrate that you've satisfied the complex arrangements. Now, recategorisation raises an interesting question because, as you know, Gilly, because you're a VAT specialist, you're an education VAT specialist, colleges can't reclaim VAT, basically.
Well, not very much. No,
not very much. And academies do.
Yeah.
And we're moving into a sector similar to academies, so we've got a mismatch. Is that fair?
Is that fair? It's a fair comment. Is it a fair position? No, probably not. So yes, you're right. Academies are in a very, very favourable VAT position. They're able to recover all, or at least nearly all, of the VAT that they incur, despite the fact that they are delivering on in the main fully funded education to children who are receiving that free of charge. Now that sounds to me quite similar to what further education colleges do, and yet they are not able to benefit from that VAT recovery.
And the reason, of course, academies have that position is because to put them on an equal playing field with other maintained sector schools that haven't come out of the maintained sector yet.
Yeah, exactly so, yeah.
So there's no major difference between the two, in effect.
No. If you're reading across from a primary or secondary academy to a local authority maintained school, the treatment is broadly the same from a VAT perspective. But then if you have an academy that provides 16 to 18 education, and some do, they will have that much better VAT recovery profile as compared to other further education colleges that do not have academia status. So effectively what we're saying is costs for further education colleges are 20% higher than they are for academies. And
their funding isn't higher, it's lower. Yeah.
Exactly.
And there's been a campaign to change this.
There has been, yeah. So ahead of the budget, the Association of Colleges ran a campaign, and it's not the first time they've commented on it. They have been quite consistent in speaking up for the sector on lots of issues, but particularly this inequitable VAT treatment for the sector as compared particularly to academies. And they were asking for the Chancellor to do something about it, whether that was increasing funding for further education or to overhaul the VAT regime that applies to them in the budget, but nothing has happened.
And presumably nothing that's happened is because it would cost money.
Yes.
But if there is a political will, politicians will stand up and say they will change the VAT regime in
Yes.
education.
Yeah,
Because we know,
indeed. And we know that there is a suggestion, at least, of a politically motivated change to the VAT treatment of education on the tracks should the general election bring forth a Labour government that does implement their changes to the independent school sector.
but let's pull it back to
Yeah.
colleges, because also, while we're talking about VAT and colleges, there were Colchester Institute cases is interesting, isn't it?
Yes, it feels like it might be slightly old news, but for the fact we had the second iteration of Colchester Institute just this month. So that was a case taken by Further Education College in Colchester, which they were successful, effectively arguing that their fully funded education provision was a business activity. So even though you could go along and sign up for one of their courses and not pay for that education, that was a business activity because it is funded by the government. They are given certain targets that they have to meet with respect to that education provision. Certain number of hours, certain outcomes need to be reached, and also crucially, you could be sitting in a classroom with a fully funded student, Giles, whilst you are there as an adult education learner who is paying for exactly the same course. The upper tribunal of the tax courts found that really meant that fully funded education had to be seen as a business activity.
But just fill in the gaps. A business activity that being education is exempt, so therefore you cannot reclaim the VAT on your costs. And the previous position was that in some activities there was previously some reclaim.
Yeah, well, the previous position was that colleges in particular had quite a lot of non-business activity, which would have been the fully funded education. And if you are undertaking a certain level of non-business activity, you're able to buy some things in free of VAT. And the main one of those benefits being on capital spend. So that relief, that ability to build the new building that you need for your high-tech new course and have the VAT relieved on that building has gone, in theory. We are in a slightly precarious and unknown territory with it all because HM Revenue and Customs has effectively said we won't force you to follow those rules that Colchester Institute set out. You can still use the old rules if you want to. Now that announcement was made in 2021 by HM Revenue and Customs, and they said at that point in time there would be another case along soon which would clarify the matter, and here we are 3 years later, and still awaiting.
So in the meantime, you'd suggest someone takes professional advice.
Yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess, really. I mean, it's quite a complicated, as you've been outlining, a complicated situation for colleges to manage anyway, with all of the financial pressures that they face, VAT being just another task to add to the list. And with these changes and the complexities of trying to identify what they do that is non-business, what they do that is business but is exempt or is standard rated or zero rated, all of that makes for, in my opinion, the most complex VAT profile that you can come across.
So, Gilly, how can we help?
Well, I think that the real benefit that we've got is that we have a real depth of knowledge about how the sector works and how education works in Larking Gowen. And that means that we're really able to answer any queries or just, be a sounding board for any problems that come up in colleges, just to give a sense check for those and chat them through. I mean, a lot of my time is spent working with further education colleges, particularly looking at their VAT calculations, their VAT recovery, planning that we might be able to do to improve the amount of VAT that they can claim back on their costs, and helping to train their staff so that they can actually navigate this minefield of a situation and manage proactively their VAT cost.
Yeah, that training point is terrifically important to get the skills into the college in what is a very, very complex area, and training so that people in a sort of pragmatic way, so that and practical and friendly way, so that people can apply the rules in their situation.
That's right, and that's not to say it's all about VAT as much as I might like it to be. They also have other taxes that they have to grapple with, and we have specialists who can help with things like their payroll. We can help with corporation tax matters if those arise as well. So lots for colleges to grapple with. We know the point is that we are here. We're at the end of the phone, and we're always happy to just provide a listening ear and give our opinion if that is needed.
Okay. I think we're going to wrap it up there. Gillian, thank you very much. So it's goodbye from me, Giles Kerkham, and
it's goodbye from me, Gillian McGill.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for joining us for Larking Gowen Insights, Accountancy and Business Advice for All. Don't forget, you can find more information about today's topic and more about how our team of experts can help you in your business by visiting our website, larking-gowen.co.uk. Join us again next time for another fascinating insight into the world of accounting and finance.